infectious diseases, research, medicine, health. Welcome to Outbreak News Interviews. And now, broadcasting from the Outbreak News Skylar Studios in beautiful West Central Florida, here is your host, microbiologist and editor of OutbreakNewsToday.com, Robert Harriman.
Well, hey everybody, this is Robert, and welcome to Outbreak News Interviews. Is the virus that causes COVID-19 in humans transmissible among animals? Now, in recent weeks, we have seen cases of domestic and large zoo cats test positive for the SARS-CoV-2 and become infected. Now, in a study led by researchers at the University of Wisconsin School of Veterinary Medicine, they looked at the transmission of SARS-CoV-2 in domestic cats. So joining me today to discuss the study is the lead researcher and research professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Peter Halfmann, PhD. Dr. Halfmann, welcome to the show, sir.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. So before we get into the study, as I mentioned in the intro, there are several documented cases of SARS-CoV-2 infection in cats. They appear to be human to feline transmission. Sir, can you talk about what we've seen so far, just for listeners who may not be aware of this?
Sure. So I think the first report we heard was coming out of Belgium, where a pet cat got sick in a household where there was a owner who was sick. And then shortly after that, we heard of the two cats that were in New York State. And all these pet cats had mild symptoms. No one died, or none of the cats died from this. I think what really got our attention was the cats at the Bronx Zoo. Ended up being potentially a sick zoo worker, and somehow infected up to 5 tigers and 3 lions, and they noticed coughing in some of those animals and some respiratory problems. So that kind of propelled us into looking at cat-to-cat transmission then of this virus.
Right. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the study that you did with the domestic cats, and that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. I'll go ahead and link to that in the show notes when the podcast is published. And so your goal was to try to demonstrate if there was animal-to-animal, cat-to-cat transmission. Can you elaborate on that at all?
Yeah, so what we kind of wanted to look at the transmission kinetics. So how long will it take from the virus to transmit from an infected cat to a co-house naive cat? How long would the infected cats then shed virus, and then how much virus would actually be shed from them? And, we're trying to complete a story here from human to cat transmission, cat to cat, and then potentially looking at cat to human. So trying to fill in these transmission chains. Right.
And there's clearly a public health need to know this information.
Yeah, I think it's important for, just as you social distance from other people at your house when you're sick, you should be kind of keeping in mind the animals that are in your house too. Social distancing from them, because you would hate to have that cat or dog be an intermediate host and spread it to the other family members.
Right. So how did you and your colleagues go about doing this study? What were the methods?
It was a small study. We had 3 pairs of cats. 1 pair were males and 2 pairs were females. They were on the younger side, so they're around a year and a half years old, and they were healthy cats. So 1 cat from each of the pair was infected. We did intranasal, oral, and ocular infection with the virus to all 3 of them. We let those infected cats sit then for 24 hours by themselves, let them kind of clean themselves off and get rid of any residual virus that might be on them. And then after 24 hours, we co-housed them again with a naive animal that we did not infect, and kind of watch what happened over 2 weeks. And then every day we took their temperature, we took body weight, and then we took swabs from their nose. And using those swabs, we looked at actually how much infectious virus was coming out of the nose every day.
So what were your findings in the end?
So we saw transmission pretty readily, as early as 2 days after the animals were co-housed, and then up to 4 or 5 days. And I think the two take homes from this was we never saw any signs of infection from these cats. Definitely signs that normal pet owners wouldn't notice. This is a little different from what was reported with the other pet cats. But in this circumstance, we had very healthy cats. So just like what we're seeing in humans that are fairly healthy, you have these subclinical infections. And the other important thing was the amount of virus that's being shed from the nose. It's at decent amounts of virus, similar amounts that you're seeing in people that are shedding the virus. So if there's person-to-person transmission of this virus with this amount of virus being shedded, we could see the same thing happening to cat to human.
Yeah. So, so that's still just a theory, though, as far as feline to human.
Yeah, but if you've been watching the news out of the Netherlands at the mink farms, so they're suspecting now mink to human transmission, which is interesting. So again, cat to human is probably plausible.
Sure.
And I think the other interesting thing was at one farm, the mink to cat transmission, and then the cats going to other farms and possibly transmitting the virus then from cat to mink again. In all cases, so there's cases of subclinical cats here too and subclinical mink.
Yeah. So no serious pathology in these cats.
Yeah, that's right. It seems to be all upper respiratory, so the nasal turbinates and the trachea, nothing lower, and no pathology, no.
Yeah. So what are the takeaways from this study for, say, your average pet owner or animal shelters or of course, zoos, as we've seen?
Yeah, so I think it has greater implications when you start talking about cat shelters and zoos. I know at the vet clinic, when I dropped my cat off last week, I noticed they weren't wearing any kind of PPE once they brought the cat inside, which I think is something we kind of need to kind of remind veterinarian clinics to do, is that you should probably still be wearing your PPE around these cats. You'd hate to transmit to the cat themselves, or in large cat shelters, you would hate to see a transmission of this virus among a lot of cats, and cats that could have immunodeficiency that could have worse infections than healthy cats.
So where do you go from here as far as the research? What's the next step?
So we're kind of more venturing now into translating this into the real world, working with veterinarians at the School of Veterinary Medicine and doing more epidemiology, trying to see if we can find cats that are seropositive from households from households that do have infections and households that don't have any infected people, and trying to see if we get any contact tracing going on within the households. And then also looking at larger cat shelters right now, it being kitten season, seeing if we can detect virus in those cat shelters and making sure the right precautions are being in place.
Do we know anything about canine infections or anything like that would also affect, households?
So I know there's been a couple experiments done in the real world. There's been two cases. I believe both of them were in Hong Kong. Right. An older dog that was maybe 17 actually succumbed to infection. And then another dog that was infected, which I believe was mainly subclinical and turned out fine. So we do have to remember our dogs too in this.
Right. And lastly, any final thoughts on the research, what's going on with COVID in animals or anything like that?
I just think we probably should keep this in mind as we're trying to root out the virus and trace the virus and try to suppress this pandemic, is to kind of keep in mind these animals as possible, if not reservoirs, intermediate hosts for transmission, and just being good pet owners and following good hygiene.
Very good. Well, I want to thank you, Dr. Peter Halfmann, for sharing your time and your expertise with us today.
All right. Thanks a lot.